The wind howled across the red wasteland like a living thing. The air was dry and bitter, carrying the scent of metal and dust. Broken ships lay scattered across the desert, silent reminders of a war long forgotten. Ethan Cole walked among them, his boots sinking into the sand. His water supply was low, his oxygen tank almost empty, and his ship had been destroyed 3 days ago. He had no destination left, only the will to survive. Then through the blowing dust, he saw movement, small, quick, and strange. At first he thought it was a scavenger drone, but then he heard it. A cry high, soft, and frightened. Human-like, yet not human at all. Ethan stopped, his hand going to the old laser pistol on his belt. He moved carefully toward the sound, eyes scanning the wreckage. A half-buried escape pod sat tilted in the sand, smoke rising from its vents. The sound came again, a child's sob. He crouched beside the pod and pulled away the broken metal. Inside, curled up and trembling, was a little girl, but not a human one. Her skin glowed faintly blue under the sunlight. Thin silver lines shimmered across her cheeks like living veins of light. Her large eyes reflected both fear and wonder. She looked no older than 7. Ethan froze. He had seen aliens before, traitors, soldiers, and refugees, but never one so young and never alone. Her small hands clutched a broken pendant that flickered weakly with holographic light. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl shrank back, pressing against the pod wall. She spoke in a soft alien tongue he couldn't understand. Her voice shook. Ethan reached into his pack slowly and pulled out a water flask. He set it down on the sand between them and backed away. The girl hesitated, then crawled forward and sniffed it. When she tasted the water, her eyes widened. She drank fast, coughing as the cool liquid hit her throat. "Easy," Ethan murmured. "Slow down. There's more." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. 2 survivors in the middle of nowhere, both lost in different ways. Finally, she pointed toward the sky and said a single word. "Mother." Ethan looked up. The twin suns burned pale above the desert. "Mother?" he repeated. She nodded and pointed again, her eyes filling with tears. He understood enough. She was lost, alone, and looking for her mother. Ethan sighed and rubbed his face. "Kid, you picked the wrong man to find." He looked around the wasteland, endless dunes, wrecks, and shadows. Helping her meant trouble. The alien patrols didn't forgive humans who touched their kind. But he couldn't leave her there. He knelt down and checked the pod again. The emergency beacon was destroyed. No way to signal anyone. The air inside smelled of burned circuits and blood. Whoever had been with her was gone. "What happened to your crew?" he whispered. The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him with wide, glimmering eyes. Suddenly, a loud hum cut through the air, sharp and mechanical. Ethan froze. The sound came from above, a patrolling drone scanning the area. He grabbed the girl and pulled her under the wing of a crashed shuttle, just as a blue beam swept over the sand. The girl gasped but stayed quiet, clutching his coat. Ethan held his breath as the drone hovered, scanning the wreckage. Its sensors whirred, and the light moved closer to their hiding spot. "Stay still," he whispered. The drone paused above them. Ethan's hand tightened around his pistol. Then, after a long second, it flew off toward the north, vanishing into the haze. Ethan exhaled slowly. His heart pounded. That was close. The girl looked at him with wide eyes, her breathing shaky. She seemed to understand they were in danger. When the silence returned, Ethan looked out across the dunes. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay the edge of the alien city. Maybe the girl's home, maybe her mother. But reaching it meant crossing territory filled with scanners, raiders, and storms. He could leave her here. Walk away, survive alone. But every time he looked at her, small, lost, clutching that broken pendant, he saw something familiar. A memory of his own daughter long gone from the war. He stood up and checked the horizon. "All right, kid," he said. "Let's find your mother." The girl blinked and tilted her head, not understanding the words but sensing the promise. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and delicate like glass. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. The wind picked up again, throwing dust into the air. Ethan adjusted his backpack, tightened the strap on his rifle, and led her away from the wreckage. Their shadows stretched long across the sand as the suns began to set. Behind them, The wrecked pod flickered one last time before shutting down completely. Far above, hidden in the clouds, a massive alien ship turned its sensors toward the desert, tracking two faint life signs moving together. The hunt had already begun. The night on the wasteland was not quiet. It was alive, filled with whispers of wind, distant rumbling thunder, and the low growl of unseen creatures moving through the dark. Ethan and the little alien girl had found shelter inside the rusted remains of an old cargo ship, half buried in the sand. The metal walls groaned every time the wind pushed against them. Ethan built a small fire using scraps of wire and dried fabric from old crates. The flame flickered weakly, painting both of their faces in gold and shadow. The girl sat close to the heat, knees pulled to her chest, her eyes glowing softly like stars reflected on water. Ethan tore open a food pack and offered it to her. She sniffed it, uncertain, then took a cautious bite. Her face twisted at the strange human taste, but hunger won over fear. He smiled faintly. "Guess you don't like human rations, huh?" She tilted her head, not understanding. Then she pointed at herself and said softly, "Lyra." Ethan paused. "Lyra?" She nodded. "Lyra." Then she pointed at him with a small blue finger. He chuckled. "Ethan." She tried to repeat it. "Ethan," he laughed quietly. Close enough. For the first time she smiled, a small, shy smile that softened her glowing features. Hours passed. The storm outside grew louder and the cargo ship rattled like an old ghost. Ethan checked his wrist device. Oxygen low, power almost gone. He needed to move at sunrise, but he didn't know where to go. As he tried to rest, he heard Lyra whispering. She was holding her broken pendant again. The light from it shimmered faintly, forming shapes, symbols he couldn't understand. She was speaking softly, almost like a prayer. He leaned closer. "You trying to call your mother?" She looked up, tears welling in her bright eyes. "Mother," she said and pointed at the sky. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't know what kind of mother would send a child across a war-torn galaxy, but he could feel the ache in her voice. He nodded slowly. "We'll find her. I promise." Outside, lightning cracked across the dunes, lighting up the night like a blue blade. The sound made Lyra flinch and cover her ears. Ethan gently placed his jacket around her shoulders. "It's just thunder. You're safe here," but she wasn't convinced. Her eyes darted toward the ceiling where a faint humming noise began to echo, mechanical, rhythmic. Ethan frowned and turned off the small fire instantly. The noise grew louder. He crept to the opening in the ship's hull and peered outside. In the distance, blue lights hovered above the sand. Scout drones. A patrol. "Damn," he whispered. He looked back at Lyra. She had curled up tightly, whispering something again, a word that repeated over and over. Fear was clear in her trembling voice. Ethan could feel it too. He quickly packed his gear and grabbed her hand. "We have to move, Lyra. Now." The drone swept closer, scanning the wrecks with long beams of light. Ethan moved through the shadows, keeping low, using the broken hulls as cover. Lyra followed close, clutching his coat. Her small footsteps barely made a sound. They reached the edge of the wreck field just as one of the drones spotted movement. A sharp alarm blared. Ethan cursed and fired his old pistol. The shot hit one of the drone's sensors, making it spiral into the sand, but more lights appeared on the horizon. He lifted Lyra and ran. The ground shook with every pulse from the drones. Blue light flashed over them again and again. Ethan ducked behind a ridge of rock, gasping for breath. Lyra touched his arm and whispered something, her voice calm but strange. The sand around them began to shimmer, particles lifting slightly into the air, forming a faint fog. The blue light from the drones passed over them and dimmed, unable to detect them. Ethan stared. What did you do?" Lyra just looked at him with tired eyes. "Hide." The drones hovered for a few more seconds, then turned away, scanning elsewhere. The hum faded into the distance. Ethan sat down hard, still breathing fast. "You saved us," he said, half in disbelief. "Guess you're full of surprises." Lyra didn't answer. She leaned against his shoulder and closed her eyes. Exhaustion had taken over. He sat there in silence, feeling the weight of the moment. He looked at her, this tiny alien girl who had powers he didn't understand, who trusted him even when her own kind hunted them both. Ethan stared at the distant horizon, where faint lights of an alien city glowed through the storm. Somewhere out there was her mother, and maybe answers about why this child was so important. He whispered to himself, "What did I just step into?" The storm began to settle. The stars slowly returned above the desert sky. Ethan wrapped his arm around Lyra to keep her warm. The night was far from over, but in that moment, under the silent heavens, two lost souls, one human, one alien, shared the same fragile hope. And somewhere far above, in the orbiting ship that had been tracking them, a voice said coldly, "Target located. Begin retrieval." The first light of dawn broke across the wasteland like a wounded sunrise, pale and cold. Ethan woke to the sound of shifting sand and the hum of distant engines. The storm had passed, leaving the desert eerily quiet. He looked around and found Lyra sitting near the rocks, tracing patterns in the dirt with her glowing fingertip. "Morning," he said, voice dry from the night. She looked up and smiled faintly. Her small face was still tired, but there was trust in her eyes now, the kind that scared him more than any drone. He packed his few supplies quickly. "We can't stay here. Those things from last night will be back." Lyra nodded as if she understood. She clutched her broken pendant close to her chest, the dim blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. Ethan checked his compass. Useless. The magnetic storms had fried it days ago. He looked toward the mountains in the distance, sharp and black against the morning light. "We'll head that way," he muttered. "High ground. Maybe I can get a signal out." They started walking. The desert stretched endless in every direction, dunes rising and falling like ocean waves made of dust. Every step sank into the soft ground, each breath dry and heavy. After an hour, Ethan spotted something, an old trade route, half buried but still marked by fallen beacons. It led toward a canyon that shimmered faintly in the distance. "Shortcut," he said, "or a death trap." Lyra tilted her head, then took his hand again. Her skin was warm this time. It made him smile despite everything. By midday, the heat was brutal. Ethan stopped by a broken transport frame to rest. Lyra sat beside him, her silver eyes scanning the horizon. She seemed uneasy. "What is it?" he asked. She lifted a small hand and pointed behind them. Ethan followed her gaze and his stomach turned cold. Far in the distance, a thin line of dust was rising. It moved fast, steady, and straight. "Patrol," he whispered. He grabbed his rifle and peered through the cracked scope. 3 hoverbikes, alien riders in black armor and coming their way. They were sweeping the desert in a search pattern. Ethan swore under his breath. "They found our trail." He pulled Lyra to her feet. "We need cover, now." They hurried toward the canyon ahead, running across the uneven sand. The sound of engines grew louder, closer, a deep rumbling that echoed off the rocks. By the time they reached the canyon mouth, the first bike was already in view. A beam of blue light cut across the sand, scanning. Ethan grabbed Lyra and ducked behind a rock outcrop. The canyon was narrow, filled with jagged stone pillars and echoes. He motioned for her to stay quiet. She pressed against him, breathing fast. The riders entered the canyon, their engines roaring. Ethan checked his ammo, 3 shots left. "Not nearly enough," he whispered to himself. "Old habits don't fail me now." As the first rider passed their hiding spot, Ethan tossed a small flare stone into the opposite direction. It burst with light and heat. The riders turned instantly, thinking they'd spotted their target. Ethan took the chance and fired once, hitting the rear bike's fuel tank. It exploded, sending sand and metal flying. The other 2 shouted something in alien language and sped forward, firing energy bolts that seared through the rocks. Ethan pulled Lyra deeper into the canyon, zigzagging through the narrow path. Lyra tripped, scraping her arm. Ethan lifted her quickly and kept running. "You okay?" She nodded, holding onto his neck tightly. Her pendant flickered faster, responding to her fear. The air around them started to shimmer again, distorting like heat waves. Then suddenly the rocks above them shifted. One of the riders fired a heavy blast that struck the cliffside. The explosion rained boulders down. Ethan dove, shielding Lyra with his body. Dust filled the air. His ears rang, his arm burned from the impact. When the dust cleared, the path behind them was blocked, but the riders were still coming. Ethan stumbled to his feet and looked around desperately. The canyon split into 2 paths ahead. He had no idea which one led out. "Left or right, kid?" he whispered. Lyra pointed to the left without hesitation. Something in her glowing eyes told him she knew the way. He didn't question it. They ran. The canyon opened into a wide basin filled with strange stone pillars shaped like spires. In the center stood an old alien structure, a broken beacon tower. Its base still pulsed faintly with power. Ethan rushed toward it, hoping for shelter or maybe a working transmitter. But before he could reach it, a shadow passed overhead. A ship. Small, fast, and armed. The lead rider spoke into his comm. The ship responded with a blinding blue light that swept across the canyon floor. Ethan felt the air hum around him. He pulled Lyra behind one of the stone pillars as the beam cut through where they had just been. The ground exploded in a shower of dust. Lyra's pendant glowed brighter, too bright. She clutched it, whispering something over and over in her language. The beacon tower answered with a pulse of energy that rippled through the air. The alien ship jerked mid-air, its engines flickering. Then it stopped firing. Ethan stared in disbelief. "You did that?" Lyra looked up, trembling but determined. "Mother, here." Her words sent chills through him. Above them, the ship steadied again, but instead of attacking, it hovered silently, scanning. Then it turned and flew off toward the mountains. Ethan watched it go, his mind racing. Something wasn't right. That wasn't a retreat, it was a signal. He looked down at Lyra, her pendant still glowing softly. "They know where you are now," he said. Lyra looked up at him with tears in her eyes, whispering the same word again. "Mother." Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle, eyes on the mountains ahead. "Then we'd better get there before they do." And with that, he led her into the rising heat of the desert, unaware that far above the clouds, a massive alien fleet had already begun to move. The desert night had fallen again, cold and sharp as broken glass. Ethan and Lyra had taken refuge inside a narrow cave at the base of the mountain range. Outside, the wind screamed through the canyons like some living spirit. Inside, their small fire flickered weakly, fighting against the shadows. Ethan sat near the entrance, cleaning his rifle and watching the horizon. The drones hadn't returned yet, but he could feel the hunt closing in. He'd seen it before, the slow tightening of a noose you couldn't see until it was too late. Behind him, Lyra slept with her head resting on his old jacket. Her pendant glowed faintly blue against the dark like a beating heart. He looked at her and whispered, "Who are you, really?" She wasn't like any alien child he'd seen. She could speak through storms, make sand turn invisible, and even disable a scout ship with a few whispered words. He'd fought in wars, seen weapons that could level cities. But nothing like this. He rubbed the scar on his hand, remembering the moment he found her in that pod. Everything since then had felt like fate pulling him toward something he didn't understand. When morning came, Ethan decided they needed to move deeper into the mountains. From there, maybe he could find a signal or locate a settlement that wouldn't kill them on sight. The climb was rough. Sharp rocks tore at his boots. The air thinned with every step. Lyra moved silently beside him, surprisingly strong for her small frame. Every now and then she would pause, close her eyes, and seem to listen to something far away. A sound only she could hear. Once, Ethan asked her, "What are you hearing?" She simply replied, "Home." By midday, they reached a ridge that overlooked a massive valley filled with ancient ruins. Towers of black stone rose from the sand, glowing faintly with alien symbols. Ethan stared in awe. "What is this place?" he murmured. Lyra stepped forward slowly, her pendant pulsing brighter. "Old city," she whispered. "My people. Before war." Before he could ask more, the ground beneath them trembled. A low hum spread through the air, like the vibration of a giant engine deep underground. Ethan's instincts screamed danger. He pulled Lyra back. Then, out of the shifting sand below, a massive drone rose into the sky. It wasn't like the small scouts they'd seen before. This one was large, almost the size of a ship, with blue eyes that burned like stars. Ethan cursed. "Down!" They dove behind a fallen pillar just as the drone fired a pulse beam that shattered stone into dust. Ethan fired back, useless. The beam scorched the ground inches from where they hid. "Lyra, we have to move," he shouted, but Lyra wasn't hiding. She stepped out from behind the pillar, her pendant blazing white now, her small hands raised toward the sky. Ethan reached for her. "No!" Before he could stop her, a blast of light erupted from the pendant, a wave that struck the drone like thunder. The machine froze mid-air, its lights flickering, then dropped straight down into the sand. Ethan ran to her and grabbed her shoulders. "What did you just do?" Lyra trembled, her breathing fast. Her eyes glowed brighter than ever. "They'd come for me," she whispered. "They know I live," Ethan frowned. "Who knows?" She hesitated, then touched the pendant again. A projection flickered to life. A glowing hologram in the shape of a tall alien woman with silver markings across her skin and eyes full of fire. Ethan froze. The woman's face was both regal and fierce, the kind of presence that filled the air even in silence. Lyra looked up at the image and said softly, "Mother." The hologram turned its gaze toward Ethan. Her voice echoed like a calm storm. "Human, you have done what few would dare. You saved my daughter." Ethan blinked. "Your daughter?" The Queen's image flickered. "Yes, Lyra is my child and the last of my blood. My enemies seek her death to end my rule. They will not stop until she is gone. Or you are." He swallowed hard. "So that's why the patrols are hunting us." "Correct," she said. "Her life is the key to peace or war. And now they know she is with you." The image began to fade. Lyra reached for it desperately. "Mother!" The Queen's voice softened. "Stay alive, my light. Trust the human. He carries courage even his kind forget." Then the light vanished. The pendant dimmed, leaving only the whisper of the wind. Ethan sat there in stunned silence. The girl he'd found lost and afraid was the daughter of an alien queen, and now every ship in orbit knew he had her. Lyra looked at him, tears in her glowing eyes. "I'm sorry." "Danger." He shook his head slowly. "No, kid. Not your fault. None of this is." He looked out at the horizon, already seeing faint flashes of light in the distance, ships moving closer. He checked his rifle, then the sky. "All right," he muttered. "If the whole galaxy wants you, they'll have to go through me first." Lyra's hand slipped into his. She gave a small nod, trusting him completely. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something powerful stir inside him. Purpose. Far above, the alien fleet descended through the clouds, their engines burning like falling stars. The war for one small child had just begun. The sky was no longer peaceful. It shimmered with faint silver lights, ships, hundreds of them, cutting through the clouds like silent predators. The war that the Queen had spoken of was no longer coming. It was already here. Ethan stood on a rocky ledge overlooking the ruined alien city. The horizon glowed faintly blue, the light of engines burning far above. He could hear the low hum of the enemy fleet even from the ground. The world itself seemed to tremble under their weight. Lyra stood beside him, her small hands clutching the broken pendant. Its glow pulsed weakly now, as though fighting to stay alive. Ethan turned to her. "If your mother's out there, we need her to find us before they do. Can this thing still send a signal?" Lyra looked uncertain. "Broken? Maybe," she whispered. "Need power." He scanned the ruins, towers of black stone, cracked but humming faintly with old energy. "Then we find some." They moved quickly through the fallen structures. The air was filled with a strange hum, an ancient rhythm that vibrated through the walls. The deeper they went, the stronger the sound grew. Finally, they reached the base of a tall obelisk. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its sides, and beneath it stood a circular platform covered in dust. Ethan brushed his hand across it, and the surface came alive with light. Lyra stepped forward, her pendant reacting instantly. The symbols shifted, aligning with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Ethan could feel the charge building in the air. "Is this safe?" he asked. Lyra looked at him with wide, calm eyes. "Don't know," she said softly. Then she stepped into the center of the platform. The light from the obelisk flared. A column of energy shot upward, connecting the platform to the sky. Ethan shielded his face from the brightness as sand and wind whipped around them. Then through the storm of light a voice echoed, clear, powerful, and haunting. "My daughter, my light." The Queen's image appeared above the obelisk, massive and radiant, her silver markings glowing like fire. The air vibrated with her presence. Lyra ran forward, her voice trembling. "Mother!" The Queen's face softened, but her tone carried weight. "You have done well to survive, my child. And you, human." Her gaze shifted to Ethan. "You have shown honor beyond your species." Ethan lowered his weapon slightly, unsure how to speak to someone who wasn't truly there. "I just did what anyone decent would." The Queen smiled faintly. Decency is rare in war. You have risked your life for one who is not your kind. For that I am in your debt. Ethan stepped closer to the light. If you're real and if you can hear me, I know we need help. There's a fleet coming. Her expression darkened. Yes, the High Council has sent assassins to erase my bloodline. Lyra's survival threatens their control. So what do we do? He asked. Her image flickered, the signal unstable. There is a temple beyond the eastern cliffs, an ancient gate once used by our ancestors. Activate it and it will open a path to my world. There she will be safe. Ethan nodded. Got it. How far? 2 days on foot, she said. But beware. They will know the signal was sent. You have little time. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. Mother, come here. Please. The Queen's expression broke for a moment, her regal mask falling away to reveal sorrow. I cannot, not yet. My enemies watch every move I make. But remember this. Her voice softened to a whisper. You are never alone. The light around them flickered wildly. Ethan could feel the heat in the air. Signal's failing, he shouted. The Queen looked directly at him one last time. Human, protect her, and if I fall before you reach me, take her to the stars. She carries the seed of our future. Then the beam collapsed. The obelisk went dark. The wind stopped. Silence filled the ruins once more. Ethan turned to Lyra. Her pendant had stopped glowing completely, now just a dull silver stone. She looked at him, her small voice shaking. She's gone? He crouched down beside her. No, just out of reach. But we'll find her. Lyra nodded, wiping her tears. We go east? He smiled faintly. Yeah, east. They packed their gear and started moving. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and endless. Every step echoed across the stones. As they climbed, Ethan glanced back. The ruined city was fading into the dust, but above it, in the distant sky, he saw the faint shimmer of ships descending. Not patrols this time, but warships. They tracked the signal, he muttered. Lyra followed his gaze. Bad men, she said quietly. Yeah, Ethan replied. And they're coming fast. He took her hand again, tightening his grip. Come on, kid. Your mother's waiting. They vanished into the cliffs as the first alien ships began to descend into the ruins. Blue light flooding the valley, far above. Among the stars, the Queen stood before her war council, watching the transmission fade. Her hand trembled slightly as she whispered, Hold on, my child. The human will bring you home. And for the first time in centuries, a queen prayed to the stars, for mercy, for hope, and for the courage of one man. The sun had barely risen when the silence broke. A deep vibration rolled across the cliffs, like thunder beneath the ground. Ethan stopped in his tracks, one hand holding Lyra close. Dust trickled down from the rocks around them. Then came the sound of engines. Dozens of them. He looked back down the valley. Black ships were cutting through the dawn sky, leaving trails of smoke and fire. The enemy had found them. Run! He shouted. They sprinted up the narrow mountain path, the sharp stones slicing through Ethan's boots. Behind them, blue plasma beams struck the cliffs, exploding rock into clouds of dust. The air burned with heat. Lyra clung to Ethan's side, her pendant flickering faintly as if trying to wake up again. They reached a plateau scattered with old stone pillars. It looked ancient, another ruin from the same civilization that built the obelisk. Ethan could see a tower at the far end of the plateau, half collapsed but glowing faintly from within. Inside, he yelled. They ran, dodging the falling debris as the enemy ships circled above. From the sky, alien soldiers began to drop, black armor glinting, weapons humming. Ethan fired back, hitting one midair. The alien crashed hard into the ground, twisting in the dirt. Ethan ducked behind a rock and reloaded. They're not gonna stop, kid. Lyra crouched beside him, shaking. They want me. He nodded grimly. Then they'll have to go through me first. The soldiers advanced, forming a half-circle. Their leader, taller than the rest, raised his weapon, a spear glowing with plasma. His voice echoed through a helmet speaker. Humans, surrender the royal offspring. You will be spared. Ethan stood, his rifle steady despite the tremor in his arms. Sorry, not my style. The leader tilted his head. Then die for her. The battle erupted. Energy blasts filled the air, turning the plateau into chaos. Ethan fired, rolled behind cover, then threw a flash charge that blinded two of the soldiers. He moved like a soldier who had lived through too many wars, calm, precise, and fierce. Lyra tried to stay low, but the shockwaves knocked her down. She covered her ears, crying out as the pendant pulsed wildly. The stones beneath her began to hum, responding to her fear. Ethan saw it too late. "Lyra?" A burst of light exploded from her pendant, sending a wave across the battlefield. The soldiers froze, their armor flickering. The leader staggered, roaring through his helmet. Ethan grabbed Lyra and pulled her toward the old tower. "Come on, let's use it for cover." Inside, the air was thick with dust and old energy. Strange glyphs glowed faintly on the walls. At the center stood an ancient power core, cracked but alive with blue light. Ethan set Lyra down beside it. "Can you do something with this?" She touched the core gently. "It listens," she whispered. Outside, the soldiers regrouped. The leader raised his spear again. "No more running." Ethan took position by the doorway, heart pounding. He checked his ammo, 2 rounds left. He took a deep breath. "Guess that'll have to do." The soldiers charged. Ethan fired the first shot, one down. Then another, hit in the shoulder. He ducked as the next blast tore through the doorway, burning the stone beside him. The smell of ozone filled the air. "Lyra," he shouted. Now would be a great time for that magic trick. Lyra's eyes were glowing now, brighter than ever. The pendant merged its light with the ancient core. Lines of energy ran up the tower walls, spreading through every crack. The entire mountain began to hum. Outside, the soldiers stopped, confused. Then one by one, the symbols around the plateau came alive. Pillars of light burst from the ground, surrounding the enemy. The leader roared and raised his weapon, but it was too late. The energy surged upward in a spiral, lifting him and his army into the air. Their armor crackled and disintegrated in blinding light. The plateau shook violently. Ethan stumbled, covering his face. The noise was deafening. When it finally stopped, silence fell again. The soldiers were gone, turned to ash and scattered into the wind. The tower still glowed softly, its ancient heart now awake after centuries of sleep. Ethan looked around, coughing. "You okay, kid?" Lyra stood at the center of the tower, her eyes still glowing, her face calm. "It listened," she said quietly. "It knows who I am." He smiled weakly. "Remind me never to make you angry." She gave a small, tired laugh. Then she swayed and nearly collapsed. Ethan rushed forward and caught her in his arms. "Hey, stay with me," he said softly. She opened her eyes and whispered, "Mother will come." He looked toward the sky. Above the smoke and clouds, a massive shadow was forming. A ship unlike any he'd ever seen. Elegant, silver, and enormous, it moved with the grace of a living thing. Ethan's breath caught. "Is that—" Lyra nodded faintly. "Queen's ship." He held her closer as the wind began to whip around them again, the silver vessel descending like a star falling from heaven. For the first time, Ethan felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The battle was over, but something deep inside told him this was not the end. He looked at the glowing sky and muttered, "Guess the universe just changed again." The great ship's light washed over them, turning the desert gold. And in that moment, standing on the edge of exhaustion and awe, Ethan Cole, the man who once wandered alone, realized he had become something far more. A protector, a soldier of humanity, and the one who carried the hope of 2 worlds. The light from the Queen's ship flooded the mountain plateau like dawn breaking over the end of the world. Silver dust floated through the air, glowing softly as it touched the ancient stones. The wind fell quiet, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Ethan stood there, cradling Lyra in his arms, both of them covered in dust and ash. Her pendant shimmered faintly again, no longer broken, healed by something beyond his understanding. Then a voice filled the air, calm, regal, and full of warmth. "Human, you have done what no army could." Ethan looked up. The great ship hovered low above the cliffs, and from its heart descended a beam of pale blue light. Out of that light stepped a tall, graceful figure, the Queen herself. Her presence was overwhelming. Her skin shimmered like molten silver, her eyes deep as the void between stars. She wore no armor, no crown, yet her very presence commanded everything around her. Lyra stirred weakly in Ethan's arms and whispered, "Mother." The Queen crossed the distance in silence. When she reached them, her expression broke, the strength of a ruler fading into the tenderness of a mother. She knelt beside Ethan, her hand trembling as she touched Lyra's cheek. "My light," she whispered, "you've come home." Ethan stepped back, letting the child fall into her mother's embrace. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra smiled, not out of fear but peace. The Queen looked at Ethan, her expression unreadable. You protected her when my people could not. You risked your life for one you did not know. Why? He shrugged, tired but honest. Because she needed me. Because someone had to. Her eyes softened. Such a simple answer. Yet it carries the weight of everything we've forgotten. She stood tall again, raising her hand. A symbol of light appeared in the air. Intricate, shifting, alive. Among my kind, this is called the Medal of Life. It is given only to those who save a royal bloodline. Few have earned it. None have been human. Ethan looked uneasy. That's not why The Queen smiled faintly. I know. She pressed the glowing symbol against his chest. It sank into him like a breath of light, spreading warmth through his veins. His skin shimmered briefly, then steadied. What did you do? He asked, startled. I've given you what your body was never meant to hold, she said softly. A gift or perhaps a curse. You can now breathe our air, walk our worlds, live among us. You will never age the same again. Ethan blinked. So I'm, what, part alien now? The Queen's smile widened slightly. No, you are more human than any I've met. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind picked up again, carrying the soft hum of the Queen's ship above. Soldiers in silver armor descended from it, kneeling before their ruler and her daughter. Lyra turned and ran back to Ethan, throwing her small arms around his waist. Come with us, she said, her voice trembling. To home, Ethan hesitated. He looked up at the massive ship, then at the sky, endless and filled with stars. For a man who once had nothing left, the universe suddenly seemed too big to walk away from. But he also knew he didn't belong there. Not really. He knelt to meet her eyes. You're safe now, Lyra, that's all that matters. Tears welled in her glowing eyes. Will I see you again? Ethan smiled gently. Count on it, kid. The Queen watched the exchange quietly. Then she placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. Come, my light. The stars are waiting. Lyra turned one last time as the beam of light surrounded them both. She raised her hand toward Ethan. Goodbye, Ethan Cole. He raised his hand back, his throat tight. Goodbye, little star. The beam lifted them slowly toward the ship. The Queen's gaze lingered on him until the light swallowed them whole. Moments later, the great vessel rose higher, its engines humming like 1,000 heartbeats. Then, with a blinding flash, it vanished into the sky, leaving only silence, dust, and the faint shimmer of energy in the air. Ethan stood alone on the cliff, staring up at the stars. His chest still glowed faintly where the Queen's gift had touched him. He didn't know what his future held, but he knew his life would never be the same again. The universe suddenly felt different, not distant, but alive, watching, waiting. He tightened the strap on his rifle, looked out across the wasteland, and smiled faintly to himself. Guess I've got new places to go. As he walked down the mountain path, the wind carried faint echoes, a child's laughter, a mother's whisper, and the hum of a ship far beyond sight. And somewhere, among the endless stars, a young alien girl looked out a window, her hand pressed against the glass, whispering softly into the void. Thank you, human. For one act of kindness, he changed 2 worlds. And in the heart of the galaxy, a legend was born, the story of the man who helped a lost alien girl find her way home.